Hello, friends. Dr. Nancy Trimbley putting the power and knowledge of your health back in your hands. If you have not picked up your copy of Stealth Health, please do. The Messages in Stealth Health, which I wrote in 2018, 19, published in 2020, the messages are more relevant today than ever before. Today, I'm going to share with you a recent research article that was published. It isn't research in the traditional sense you might think, where they had a group of people that they enrolled in a study to do a study. This was a retrospective study done in the state of Florida with looking backwards on the health history of some of the Florida citizens. And it is directly related to the rate of vaccination and the rate of problematic disorders, lifelong disorders that can occur in a person. And I wanted to weave that into other things like I like to do. The first I'm going to show you is this photo I got from my mom not too long ago. And this is my first grade photo. And if you can see in the camera, if I can keep the glare off of it, you see my cheeks are very round, which, for a 6, 7-year-old, not uncommon. But when I looked at this photo with my mom just the other day, she said, "Oh, yeah, that was the day before you were diagnosed with the mumps." The mumps. And she said, "Yeah, you kids." Now, my mom was born in Jamaica, New York, so she's got a little bit of an accent. "Yeah, you kids had all that stuff: mumps, measles, German measles, also called rubella, chicken pox. Y'all had that." So this was the day before I had the mumps, which is what's called a childhood illness, childhood disease. And for all of us, my age and younger, and maybe a little bit or and older than me, and maybe a little bit younger also, this was a normal part of growing up. We would have chickenpox parties. So if one of your friends had chickenpox, the mom would probably open their door and say, "Bring the kids over so they can get it." Because it was the kind of thing where you got this illness one time and then you had lifelong immunity. Um, well, at that time, this was the vaccine schedule over here. This was prior to 1983. It was the oral polio vaccine, the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine. I probably got that. Now, this one includes the MMR. I probably didn't get the MMR because I got literally the mumps. And so this is prior to 1983. This list over here that spans this page over to this page is from 1983 to 2016. So you can see the list of vaccinations has probably quadrupled since the early 80s. And so this research article that I'll show to you in a moment looks at, well, what are our results? Because my feeling has always been for you as the patient or the parent in this case to have all of the information so you can make an informed choice. And that could be what's available, what are the risks, what are the benefits, what are the alternatives, what are the costs to me, what does the cost, maybe a high cost right now, outweigh the benefits of what I'm going to do? Or do those benefits that I'm going to receive or my child will receive all through their life outweigh the costs that I might have to outlay right now? So, so let's look. Oh, by the way, before I forget to mention this, this book, excellent book called The Vaccine Friendly Plan, was written by Paul Thomas, a medical doctor, and Jennifer Margulis, PhD. And this morning I read the introduction just to reacquaint myself with the book. It's a great book. It goes through every single vaccine that you might be faced to either get, not get, delay, space out, every single one, and what the benefits and risks are. And so you can make an informed choice. So this Dr. Paul Thomas, interestingly enough, lost his license to practice pediatrics in the state of California in and around 2020 and 2021 because he was vocal about not giving the COVID shot to children. He may have been vocal about it 100% across the board about his lack of support of it, but specifically didn't want children to get it. And I'm not unsure what his status is right now, but because he spoke out against the establishment, he lost his license to practice. And in the introduction for his book, which was published in, let me find the title page, 2016, Dr. Thomas says in his introduction that some of the recommendations we, meaning pediatricians, make today simply make no sense when you look at the science or the lack of science. Some of what we are ordering parents to do is doing more harm than good. This is written in 2016. He goes on to say, and still in the introduction here, that currently a lot of the vaccinations that had an excess of mercury in them, which in and of themselves, the amount of mercury in an individual vaccine was not, quote, problematic, although any amount of mercury probably is extremely dangerous. But when you combine all the vaccines that a child may get, when you add those up cumulatively and sum that up, it was at a very extremely high amount. He said that those vaccines have been used up because even when we knew thimerosal, which is a mercury additive, was dangerous, um, for some reason, the stock that was already created had to be used up. So the current ones are not using thimerosal, but he goes on to say that the CDC, the current CDC recommended childhood vaccine schedule exceeds the toxic limits of safe aluminum exposure. So that's a whole nother thing to talk about related to vaccine safety. Um, and he relates the amount of vaccines, columns and columns and columns of vaccines that children are getting. He relates that to repeating the same mistake we made with antibiotics. We may be overusing a medical intervention that was a lifesaver and drastically changed the course of health history, but may be becoming more dangerous than the disease itself. And that's why I bring up my first grade photo of me the day before I got mumps. And I had mumps and I had the measles and I had chicken pox. So he goes on to reiterate what I just said. In 1983, the CDC recommended 11 total shots for children spaced out between the ages of 2 months to 16 years to protect against 7 diseases. In 2015, the CDC recommended at least 50 shots starting in the first hours of life and continuing to age 16 to protect against 16 diseases. And what this means is that today's children get more than 4 times as many vaccines as they did so 30 years ago, most of them in the first 18 months of life. And if you've listened to any of my other YouTubes about childhood vaccinations, I have told you about how I have sat with moms that told me about how their child changed from one day to the next at or around 18 months of age. And this was after some of their shots. And what breaks my heart is not only that whole scenario about how this child is damaged for life, but also that the 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 powers that be say there's no science to support that, but yet you can't look into a mom's eyes and believe that she is telling you the truth. So anyway, back to learning more about this topic. Um, and and this begs the question, is the CDC really protecting us? I bought the Pfizer papers with a foreword by Naomi Wolf, who is a novelist. And this was the Pfizer papers are the pre-release data that Pfizer had about the COVID shot that they wanted to release slowly over the course of 75 years, at which time all of us would be dead and wouldn't care anymore about what these papers said. And through something like the Freedom of Information Act, and I might not have that right, but through a congressional a directive, that all that data had to be released. And it took 3 years and 3,000 people, volunteers, to go through all that data. And if all you really need to do is read the table of contents, and it is 34 chapters where they go through these different studies. And I will just read a few of the titles of the chapters. Chapter 1, liver adverse events, 5-day deaths within 20 days of injection. 9 months post-COVID mRNA vaccine, and they put vaccine in quotes, rollout, substantial birth rates drop in 13 countries in Europe. 77% of cardiovascular adverse events from Pfizer's mRNA COVID shot occurred in women, and as well as in people under age 65. 2 minors suffered cardiac events. Let's see. 542 neurological adverse events, 95% serious in first 90 days of Pfizer mRNA vaccine rollout. 16 deaths. Females suffered adverse events more than twice as often as males. Autopsies reveal medical atrocities of genetic therapies. They're calling the mRNA shot a genetic therapy being used against the respiratory virus. 449 patients suffer Bell's palsy. Dr. Kruger, MD, breast cancer specialist, reveals increase in cancers and occurrences of, quote, turbo cancers following these genetic therapy, quote, vaccines. And that was just up to chapter 10. You can get this. You don't have to. You can just believe me that the CDC is not protecting you and that the drug companies are not protecting you. And this vaccine rollout was paid for by the US government, which is your tax dollars. So you really, really, really have to ask, where are my tax dollars going? Who's protecting us? Because it's certainly not the pharmaceutical companies, and it's certainly not the CDC. So let's go on. Sorry, I do get all worked up about this stuff, don't I? So let's go on. I'm going to share screen with this research study that was just published January 23rd, 2025. Vaccination and Neurodevelopment Disorders, a study of 9-year-old children enrolled in Medicaid. Remember, Medicaid is controlled by each state, and this happens to be Florida Medicaid. It is a 54-page report, which I read through. Some parts I need to just scan because there's a lot of math, and I just have to trust that their math is correct. And what I wanted to bring your attention to was, oops, I think I passed. It was the results section, which is right up here in the abstract. An abstract of a paper gives you a summary. So the background of the research study, the methods that were used, and the results. I wanted to talk to you about the results. So they started off with 47,155 9-year-old children. Now they whittled that number down for a variety of reasons. They wanted to be sure that they had a good starting group to look at. And like I said, they just looked in reverse as to what the kids, what their vaccination status was, and what diagnoses they that got attached to them. And I want to direct your attention to this sentence. I think it's the third sentence in the paragraph, or maybe second. Children with just one vaccine visit were 1.7 times more likely to have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder than the unvaccinated. And to continue, now, if you've read my book, Stealth Health, you know that I like when I see a report, a study that's done, and they talk about percentage increase. If it's 17% increase or something like that, that is not what we call statistically significant. And you have to look at the raw numbers for that. But when we talk about numbers that are multiples, like 2 times more prevalent, 3 times more prevalent, 4 times more prevalent, multiples of whole numbers, not a percentage, then we're talking real numbers. So let me repeat what I just said. Children with only one vaccine, just one, were still almost 2 times more likely to have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And then to continue the same sentence, children with 11 more vaccination visits were 4.4 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder than those with 0 vaccination visits. So let that sink in for a moment. If your child gets just one vaccine visit at a pediatrician's office, they are almost twice as likely to be diagnosed later on with autism spectrum disorder. And this includes babies, it includes infants, of course, and toddlers. If your child goes through the regular vaccination schedule, which I showed to you, is all these columns long, they are 4.4 times more likely to be later diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Now, this is just retrospective. This is just looking. We're just observing. We're just putting our binoculars on and we're just looking. This is not making any speculation. It is just the numbers. And it is just one small group of kids in Florida. It is just the 9-year-olds. And it's just the 9-year-olds that have been part of the Medicaid system the whole time. So all of their data is available. It's just the numbers. So my feeling about this, with this in front of us, is just to say, what's up with this? Is it just literally the vaccine, or is there things associated with the vaccine? When kids that whose parents have them do the vaccine schedule, are they also taking more Tylenol? Is their diet a certain way? Were they born in a certain way? Versus kids that are not vaccinated. Are their parents more or less educated? Are their parents eating differently? Are they all vegan? Are they all Eskimos? Like, are they all Amish? What is there a reason? Is there more data available in these two groups that we can sort out? But you can't answer the question if you don't ask the question, why is this? And maybe it's a vaccine, maybe it's something totally different. We don't know, but there seems to be a sorting factor of what we can start with. That's not a job for me. I am not a researcher and I'm not a numbers person, but I'm a logical person and I'm thinking, why is this? Let me go back to sharing because I want to show you again just a little bit more in this article. Like I said, it's 54 pages. We're not going to read it all. We're going to go down to this introduction, and this is the fourth paragraph, I think, in the introduction. And this first sentence caught me. This uncertainty led the present authors, that's the authors of the study, to undertake such a comparison. So, what uncertainty? Let's go back to the paragraph before. Government-sponsored studies have not compared health outcomes in vaccinated versus completely unvaccinated children. And if you're in my camp of thinking about the COVID vax, there was word on the street at one point that um, every they want everybody to get the vaccine, so there's no control group. Well, what does that mean? A control group is a group of people in a study that had nothing done to them. So if you want to study chiropractic patients, you would study maybe chiropractic patients that had this technique, that had this other technique, that had chiropractic plus massage, like different variables. But then, in order to control and see if your results were valid, you have to have a group of people that get nothing because you have to compare it, the something group to the nothing group. So it's interesting to me that this article is saying that government-sponsored studies have not compared health outcomes in vaccinated versus completely unvaccinated. And that's really not a hard study to do because I just mentioned Amish people. Amish people do not get vaccinated. Now, I'm speaking as a broad group. There could be some sects within with SECTS sects within the Amish community that do, but I think for the most part they stay out of the medical system, the conventional medical system. Also, I know many, many, many chiropractors who have not been vaccinated and whose children are not vaccinated. So it's not a difficult group to find. You just have to look. And why government sponsored studies would not want to look at this when they are responsible for caring for these people that are possibly vaccine or that are injured throughout the rest of their life. Interesting to me. So I want to go on in the same paragraph in the introduction, and it talks about the numbers of kids. A sample of 666 children was obtained, of which 261 were unvaccinated, and that's 39% were unvaccinated from this sample. As expected, the vaccinated were significantly less likely than the unvaccinated to have been diagnosed with chickenpox and whooping cough, which is pertussis. So it does say the vaccines work. So the vaccinated kids had a much lower rate of getting chickenpox and getting whooping cough. There were, however, the vaccinated group, however, was significantly more likely to be diagnosed with pneumonia, ear infections, which is otitis media, allergies, and neurological deficit disorders. Neurological deficit disorders, they define right here in this paragraph, is a learning disability, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, or ASD, that's autism spectrum disorder. And partially vaccinated children had intermediate odds of getting neurodeficit disorders. So they're saying there's a dose response relationship. What that means is the more diagnosed or the more vaccines you got, the more diagnoses would have been made. Now I'm going to, this is the methods that they used of filtering out which children were going to have their data looked at and all of that and how they chose. They started out with 10 million Medicaid patients in the state of Florida, and then they filtered it down to the study population of 47,000. And then different tables and how those were sorted out even more and the statistical analysis. Now here's the results. And I want to just, so I don't bore you too much more, I'm going here to figure 2. which is the odds ratio of neurological deficit disorders by vaccination status in the 9-year-old Medicaid children. I just read you the title of this graph. So you can see when you look at the blue, they're using the unvaccinated kids, the value, and then comparing it to the vaccinated kids and the odds ratios of getting these different disorders. So the orange is the vaccinated kids, the autism spectrum disorders, hyperkinetic syndrome, that's hyperactivity, epilepsy or seizures was 3.5 times more. Learning disorders, 6.8 times more. Encephalopathy, which is inflammation of the brain. Tic disorders, 6.2 times more prevalent. And other neurological deficit disorders. So you can see there's a very distinct pattern. That's figure 2. Figure 3 is another bar chart. And this is the preterm. If your child is born preterm, meaning premature, and they have had vaccinations, right here, the learning disorders, 9.8 times more likely to have a learning disorder versus a child that was born at term without vaccines. I'm pretty sure that's what they're comparing. All right, and then this last one. Okay, so this is the relative risk of diagnosis with autism spectrum disorder and increasing number of visits that included vaccinations. So the children with no vaccination visit, they are a standard of 1, where if you just get 1 vaccine, like we talked about earlier, the chances of your child ending up with autism are almost doubled. If you get 4 vaccine visits, it's nearly the same, almost doubled. If you get 5 vaccine visits, the chances are nearly 3 times more likely that your child will end up with autism disorder. And if you have 11 or more visits, it is over 4 times more likely. This is just one study. It does repeat studies that have done previously. And I'm going to tell you, there's not a lot of them. And some of the arguments against some of these studies is that, well, the dude doing the study is biased because his kid has autism. Okay, who else is going to do the study? Do you think the drug companies are going to pay for this study? Obviously, it was mentioned in this article that the government is not funding these studies or has not up until this point. That might be changing, and that would be great. We just need to take a look. We just need to take a look. If you've met one person with autism, we don't even know what their perception is inside their body. Are they perceiving that they're out of touch with the world or not? How and these people who turn into adults cannot fully engage in connections, in relationships, in vocations, in jobs with their families. It's so sad. Why haven't we done something about this up until this point? And if the tides, if the universe has said that it's okay to make a change right now, I fully support in just answering the question, why? So as always, I'm hoping that with each day forward, you get closer to being your own best expert. Be well. Bye for now.